Ladies and gentlemen, Jeannie Burke.
Good morning. Do me a favor, open up your programs. What do you see? Scan the schedule. Vin mentioned it, but I hope as you look at this schedule, you'll see what it's all about. It's about leadership. And we're here in a festival of leadership. I think that's what we could call this summit, a festival of leadership, in which we are exposing, exploring, celebrating, and nurturing leadership in all forms. And take a look. These leaders do come in all forms. They're design and engineering professionals. They're elected officials. They're young, they're old, they're in between. But what is it that they have in common? Think for a minute. They have vision, they have passion, and they have tenacity. And I'd like to go off script for just a second to recognize Vin Cipolla, the president of MAS. He just gave me a look that could kill. I'm sorry, Vin. But back on script, let's take a look at the leaders that we're going to see today, particularly our first keynote speaker, Judith Rodin. Now, I bet Judith, from the day she was born, was a leader. I actually don't know, I wasn't there. However, I've been watching her secretly and openly for many, many years, and I can document that leadership. She was a brilliant student at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was the student body president. She then went on to a star-like career as a PhD student at Columbia. From there, off to New Haven, where she rose from assistant professor to provost with lightning speed. And then before you know it, she was the first female president of an Ivy League institution. Absolutely stunning. And what did she do there at University of Pennsylvania? That leadership shone. She was a leader in the city. She transformed a very sad neighborhood into an urban destination, University City, that now has more visitors, I think, than the Liberty Bell. Now, she has moved from that and is exploding this leadership at the Rockefeller Foundation. She has transformed the foundation, focusing its efforts on 4 major areas that are of great importance to us. Thinking about livelihoods, thinking about health, thinking about ecosystem systems, and for us, the holy grail, transforming cities. While there, she has initiated many, many programs. One of the most stunning is one that's about to start right now, the selection of 100 resilient cities, and I think she'll tell you about that as she goes forward. She has much experience in this idea of resilience, as you can see from her career, but also from the things that she's been doing here in New York State. When Andrew Cuomo needed a chair of his commission to study what the state should do after Sandy, who did he pick to chair but Judith Rodin? Judith, come share some more with us.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. Now you can see why Jeannie was my favorite Penn faculty member. But it's wonderful to be working with you in yet another way and in your leadership of the MAS. And I join you in your salute of Vin Cipolla. Vin, you're doing an incredible job, and you're leveraging so many ideas, not only from New York, which is so full of incredible innovation and great ideas, but increasingly, as we're seeing, from around the world. And I'm bookended by 2 fantastic foundation presidents in Stephen and Rip Rapson, who you will hear from. So I think partnership may be the new form of leadership in the 21st century. And I think you are going to see as a theme in today's leadership how many innovative partnerships are developing and their real capacity for producing leverage. We've been at this, and I think excited about this conversation, this summit, which is now, I guess, 4 years old. And it's always been focused on highlighting shared challenges, but also looking together for innovative solutions. But it is very clear that the conversations we're having over these 2 days are of a very different tone and texture than those at previous summits. From our perspective, and I will focus mostly on the resilience issue, Superstorm Sandy really changed how we in New York perceive threats and how we work to prepare for the unplanned and the unexpected. Before Sandy in New York, we all kind of lived in the world of what if. I think that coincidentally was the name of a 2007 Rockefeller-funded challenge, which was calling for the design of temporary housing for New Yorkers if we were hit by a Category 3 hurricane. In 2011, we supported the Rising Currents exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, which brought 5 interdisciplinary teams together to re-envision the coastline of New York Harbor in the face of rising sea levels. And I'll just mention 2 innovative solutions that were proposed, one by Architecture Research Office to cover underground infrastructure such as power lines in waterproof vaults while creating adjacent underground channels to filter the water out. Another recommendation by N Architects to deploy inflatable barriers on the coastline intended for surges of up to 20 feet, which ultimately could surely have slowed the storm surge from Hurricane Sandy. In addition, we've been actively working with quite a visionary group on Jamaica Bay, the idea here to build a resilience center and an urban park, which would be a kind of in vivo experimental laboratory, but also protect more than 800,000 New Yorkers who call the estuary home. My colleague Eddie Torres delivered a terrific presentation last year at the summit detailing many of these efforts. And at the summit last year, he tried to make a strong case for the critical importance of adopting resilience-building strategies. That was just 2 weeks before Superstorm Sandy pounded our coastline and brought many of our worst fears to reality. It disrupted livelihoods and caused more than $60 billion in damage. So post-Sandy, we can no longer think of what if. We have to be thinking about what now, with full knowledge that Superstorm Sandy is neither the first nor the last catastrophe to befall us, and that it is really only one of several shocks. Some will be human-made, some will be climate-driven or ecological, but other kinds as well, as we saw in 9/11, that could pound us again. Sandy demonstrated that resilience is more than just the capacity to rebuild our housing or to show resolve in the face of adversity in a way that's sort of just what New Yorkers do. Resilience is about the capacity of entire systems, entire communities, and regions to prepare for, to withstand, and to emerge stronger from shocks and stresses. Sandy moved building resilience to the top of our public consciousness. And for the 2 million people who lost power for 2 days when our electric grid failed, for those families who watched as their homes burned to the ground, as the storm surge kept first responders from reaching them, and for the nearly 300 people still living in hotels a year later, unable to return home. Indeed, for all of us, resilience is no longer an option. It is truly an imperative, not just for New Yorkers, but as you heard from Stephen, for people living in cities all over the world. Between catastrophic storms, flooding, earthquakes, wildfires, a shock occurs somewhere in the world every day. And because of globalization, those shocks have the ability to spread quickly across the globe. For example, the floods in Bangkok and the tsunami and nuclear disaster in Japan took down several global supply chains, with more than 3/4 of the planet expected to live in cities by 2050, including 1 million more people in New York alone. These shocks will only continue to increase in impact unless we intervene now. Rockefeller's had a decade of experience in thinking and working on the issue of resilience around the world. It began with our work in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and then through our Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network, which works with more than 40 cities now in 6 Asian countries to help them build resilience, putting projects on the ground that range from improved drainage and flood management to ecosystem strengthening, from building community capacity to early detection networks for disease control. We've been thinking about investing in New York as well for years before Sandy was a blip on our radar. In a way, as we know, New York was better prepared than most cities for an event like Sandy, but we still have such a long way to go. Today, we're fortunate to have all three levels of government focused on rebuilding in a way that will make us more resilient, and that alignment is historic. But as we elect our next mayor, as we navigate the fallout from the shutdown of the federal government, including its impact on some of the post-Sandy recovery, we have to ensure that momentum is not lost, that our coordination and our energies are sustained, and that the recommendations developed by all three commissions, Governor Cuomo's, Mayor Bloomberg's, and the federal Sandy Task Force, are implemented. I'd like to highlight 5 lessons from our work around the world and also our experience post-Sandy with regard to resilience. We think these are critically important to consider. First, resilient systems, and indeed, as we all know, that's what cities are. Cities are a system of systems. Resilient systems share a number of qualities, both in good times and in times of stress. These qualities include the capacity for robust feedback loops that sense and allow new options to be introduced quickly as conditions change. Second, the flexibility to evolve. Third, options for limited or safe failure, which prevents stressors from rippling across systems, so we need islanding or de-networking at times. Fourth, we need spare capacity, which ensures that there's a backup or alternative available when a vital component of the system fails. And fifth, we must have the capacity for rapid rebound to reestablish function quickly and to avoid long-term disruptions. The second thing we've learned is that while many of the necessary solutions are low cost, and I want to emphasize that there are many that are, institutional coordination, rapid and accurate information sharing, timely decision-making, some forms of soft ecosystem strengthening, it is also true that building urban resilience costs money. It is not something that local government and philanthropy can do alone. We must have the partnership of the private sector. There are billions of dollars in private financing to be unlocked and directed towards investments in infrastructure, for example. One recommendation we made through the NYS 2100 Commission was the creation of a dedicated infrastructure bank to help coordinate and integrate infrastructure development and investment across the region and make it green and resilient. A centralized approach to infrastructure-related decision-making rather than how we do it now, a project-by-project, agency-by-agency process, we felt would go a long way to catalyze and maximize investment. Since January, we've seen some significant changes in policy and practice, and I commend now the establishment of the New York State Green Infrastructure Bank. Financing isn't the only role that the private sector can play. Indeed, businesses must shore up their own contingency and continuity plans to ensure that they have the capacity to bounce back quickly after disruption. We saw the worst of what happens when these plans fail. Hospitals evacuating patients when their backup generators didn't work. But we also saw some easy and small ones at their best. For example, sandbags positioned around Goldman Sachs' headquarters meant that it was one of the few buildings downtown that remained dry. And kudos now to Con Ed for their initial new $1 billion commitment to implementing smart grid technology. We need this desperately. It is a true resilience strategy. The third thing we're learning is that even when cities have the resources and the partnerships, they are not always using them effectively. I remember reading with horror the stories of those homeowners in the very hard-hit Breezy Point area who were stalled from rebuilding their homes, not because they lacked the money, but because the map that the New York City Department of Buildings was using to grant permits was from 1948. 1948, before many of the areas devastated by Sandy were even built. A law passed by the state legislature in June expedited repairs by allowing homeowners to bypass the permitting process, but it still had been many months and long delays that kept many residents from returning home. And today, only a fraction of Breezy Point residents have been able to move back. But with catastrophic events as our new normal, as Vin said, as you will hear so many speakers today say, merely rebuilding each time disaster strikes is simply no longer an option. We need strategies that not only respond to the last disaster, but that prepare for the next and that account for a broad range of possibilities. The next catastrophe will quite likely not be a Category 1 hurricane, but something of a very different nature entirely. Now, post-apocalyptic movies have given us a lot of scenarios to choose from, ranging from tidal waves to asteroids to blizzards to sharknadoes. But I would like to suggest that a more likely scenario will be a deadly heat wave. In the last 20 years, New York has experienced 6, and we know the results take a very human toll. In Europe, the heat wave of 2003 caused more than 70,000 deaths, a majority of them in large cities like Paris. Marginalized communities are often the most vulnerable to extreme heat. They're less likely to own air conditioners, they have less access to green space, they're more likely to live in places with poor insulation. And so we must remember that our planning must not only recall 9/11 or fix what was broken by Sandy, but prepare for any number of shocks. And one of the compelling features of that preparation is that many of these investments, many of these interventions benefit people in their daily lives when there aren't shocks and stresses. For example, bus rapid transit systems or smart grids, which I've mentioned, more water-absorbent paving materials, more integrated information and feedback systems. So this can be a triple win because it improves daily lives, it has us better prepared for shocks and stresses, and it enables quicker and more effective rebound. Fourth, we've learned that while investments in infrastructure are critical, we must also empower individuals to build their own resilience and the resilience of their communities. In an Associated Press NORC poll, which Rockefeller funded, of more than 2,000 people in our broad communities who were impacted by Sandy, 1/3 of all respondents said that they reached out to nearby friends, family, and neighbors for assistance, far more than said they turned to government for help. The poll also found that neighborhoods higher in social cohesion, in other words, in the bonds that encourage neighbors to check in on neighbors in times of stress, those high cohesion neighborhoods have recovered more quickly. We heard incredible stories of neighbors helping neighbors during and after the storms. Stephen just told some of those from the recent events in Canada, forming human chains to ensure that no one was left behind. In New York, we saw community organizations that turned shelters into spaces of culture and dignity. We saw an incredible outpouring of volunteers and supporters from every borough and from across the country. I recently read about a crew of Mennonites who are still driving to Staten Island and the Rockaways all the way from Lancaster County to provide their carpentry skills to rebuilding homes, creating a connection between two communities that surely would otherwise never have interacted. But this contributes to the social resilience of our country as a whole. Finally, we've learned that true resilience, as important as it is locally, is not only a city-by-city effort. Today, as I said, one city's resilience is inextricably bound up not only with the world, but bound up with its own region. And so we need to be thinking about resilience on both a regional and global scale. This summer, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced, in partnership with the Municipal Arts Society, the Rockefeller Foundation, and other partners, a competition to understand and actually leverage these regional interdependencies and to introduce design and planning approaches that fit local contexts but could be scaled regionally. Teams from around the world were invited to propose design solutions that incorporate both the built and natural environments and that cross regional boundaries, for example, watersheds or new ecosystem investments. In 2 weeks, the 10 selected teams will present their ideas, and what's compelling is that these ideas have been developed not only with the experts on the team, but through a collaborative analysis of the region and significant engagement with local stakeholders. You're going to hear more about this in a panel later today. But while regional approaches, even regional approaches, are critical, as I said, urban resilience is a global imperative. And so as part of our centennial this year, the Rockefeller Foundation launched 100 Resilient Cities, which is a global challenge to select 100 cities around the world and support them in their resilience building efforts. We closed the application process for that competition this week, and the outpouring from around the world has been truly extraordinary, from Mogadishu, Somalia, to Greenwich, Connecticut, with Tehran in between. So it's a pretty amazing panoply as cities really recognize their needs in this domain. Cities will receive 4 types of support. First, support to hire a chief resilience officer, that person who will sit inside municipal government, who will wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night thinking about resilience and ensuring that all the stakeholders are coordinated. Second, the technical support with a lot of expertise to build a citywide resilience strategy. Third, access to a suite of services that will include a lot of big data analytics and innovative technology that are very important for resilience building. A lot of expertise on sophisticated land use planning, support to leverage billions of dollars in private financing to bring these resilience projects to life, and new forms of municipal level catastrophe risk models and insurance. We have an initial group of partners on a platform that will be provided for the winning cities. The partners so far include Swiss Re, Palantir, Architects for Humanity, the American Institute of Architects, and the World Bank. And finally, the cities will all receive access to one another as we create this truly global network of 100 cities to share what works. Let me conclude by just stating again that it's clear that we cannot prevent every future disaster from occurring, but we can prevent failing catastrophically by embracing and practicing and improving our comprehensive resilience strategies. The world is watching now and learning from New York. This really is our moment to lead the way. Thank you.